Hello everyone, I'm Janet Salmons, and I'd like to talk with you about generating qualitative data online with arts-based and participatory methods. I'm re-recording a webinar I offered for the Social Research Association, and I'd like to thank the SRA for sponsoring this event. After a brief introduction, I'll provide an overview of enacted methods and then talk about two types, visual methods and participatory methods. I've also included some exercises and additional resources you can download and use. So here I am in Boulder, Colorado, at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, talking with you wherever you may be. This is just exciting to me, no matter how long I've been at it. And it's this excitement about the potential for rich dialogue online that has inspired me to delve into the possibilities of using these technologies for qualitative research. And I'll be sharing what I've learned through my experimentation in my own research, as well as what I've learned from other researchers who I've spoken with and reviewed to learn about emerging approaches. I'll also be using some other experiences I've had in conducting training and educational activities using interactive drama. Through these experiences, I've learned techniques for encouraging people to talk and work through problematic and sensitive issues. So when I started to conduct research, I realized that what I've learned from my work in the arts certainly might apply in the research realm. So I'll start by sharing this model of the qualitative e-research framework. I created this model because I feel that it's important to take a holistic view when we're conducting research using technology. If you think for a moment about the ways you communicate in your personal, social, and professional lives, why do you communicate with someone with a text message versus an email? Why do you post on someone's social networking site wall rather than have a conversation using video conferencing? What makes you select those choices? Is it your own comfort and preference and access, or is it the preference of the person with whom you are communicating? Or is it the nature of the kind of message or the timing of that message that informs your choice? Whatever it may be, those kinds of thought processes and decision-making steps certainly apply in research as well when we are conducting the kind of study that involves communicating with participants. So, those choices inform our selection of the sample, how we recruit them. Certainly has to do with the kinds of ethical issues we'll need to resolve, the kinds of analysis we're going to conduct, the position that we take with the study. But we don't have time to go into all of those items today. We're going to really focus on the choices that you make about the kinds of data you want to collect and how those choices tie in with the research design and allow you to fulfill the purpose of the study. So in considering the options for online qualitative research, it seems to me that it's important to think about where the data is, how we're going to obtain it, and our relationship as researchers to the study. So in this first type of extant research, we're using materials that have been developed without our influence. The people who developed these materials were not concerned with the purpose or problem driving our study. They were created for some other reason. So we might use content or other kinds of analysis, document analysis, some observational techniques to conduct these kinds of studies. We may use historical materials, digital humanities kinds of studies where the materials were developed before the internet age and scanned into archives or libraries that may be available to the general public or may require special permission or access. These would certainly include lots of visual materials, including photographs, artworks, graphics, media, etc. Then when we go into this next type, we have to draw a line because, one of the big differentiators between the extant types of research and these other kinds is that here we're talking about interaction with consenting human participants. We're directly interacting with the person on the other side of the screen. So with elicited types of studies, we're using perhaps interviews, one-on-one or group, participant observation, or even some types of questionnaires to pose questions or prompts to our participants. And then I think there's still yet another level of online research we can think about, and this is what I'm calling enacted studies. In these very highly interactive and collaborative studies, participants really kind of move into a role of co-researcher. And we're highly engaged with these participants during the study. And so a couple of the key words here are that we're now generating data from within the study. So rather than thinking about collecting the data, we're thinking about generating the data together with the participants. Certainly not a hard and fast line between these two types, which is why I've created a continuum here. And certainly we might use questioning and elicitation techniques together with other participatory and arts-based methods that fall into the enacted category. So when we're thinking about the artistic materials, again, we can use historical materials, contemporary materials, or emergent materials that are the dynamic, constantly evolving kinds of visual and written materials posted online as we speak. And certainly the options are different depending on the type we choose. Permissions and other kinds of ethical issues may be somewhat different, as we look at these types of extant materials. But, why would we then move to this next level and use elicitation types of methods? Well, as rich as that extant data may be, it may not be complete because, as I mentioned, the folks who created it were not responding to our research purpose. Or it may be that after reviewing extant data, we find that we have new questions. We want to know why and what and the motivations and experiences behind that posted information. We may want to know how individuals understand or depict their experiences with the phenomenon. So, in thinking about perhaps using historical materials, we may want to know how people today interpret those materials and make use of them. So even though the extant data is certainly valuable as a first stage of this type of study, it may be that we want to take these further steps and then even go to the next level of the enacted methods. And here we may be studying sensitive, complex, or abstract kinds of topics and questions, and we want to know how someone might respond to a particular problem or within a particular kind of situation. And rather than simply asking the person to recall a previous occurrence of this type of situation and to describe how they might have acted at that time, where we've got the filter of time and memory. We also might have the concern on the part of the participants that maybe I'm not responding in the way that you want. Maybe I didn't handle this problematic situation in the best way. Perhaps you will think I'm a bad teacher or a bad mother, or I just don't know what I'm doing. And so creating these kinds of fictional, safe scenarios and situations, might allow us to have a more comfortable conversation, may create a safer environment for conversation. So we might also use these approaches when we're working with people who speak a different language or have limited verbal skills and might be more comfortable or be able to communicate better visually, or when studying youth who, let's face it, would probably rather interact with a technology platform, even if we're right in front of them. So you might say, when you're conducting this kind of study, where does the data come from? So much as I'm recording this particular session here, the beauty of using technology is that it allows us to save and capture all of the interactions from the research event. So that becomes a valuable part of our data. We can review those recordings, reread those materials, and look at them carefully for our data analysis process. In addition, we might ask participants to reflect on their experiences and to share those journal entries or diaries that might include visual or written materials, or even links to other kinds of materials that they feel represent something about their own experiences and perspectives. We have our own observations, research memos and notes, any kinds of digital artifacts we might collect. And then, after the research event, we might follow up with a round of interviews, some select focus groups or questionnaires, or even simple questioning by email to see whether participants have any additional insights or would like to clarify anything that they said during the research event. So let's start by looking more closely at visual methods. And I like to begin with this quote from Michael Pryke. Questions, after all, raise some profound issues about what kind of knowledge is possible and desirable, and how it is to be achieved. For example, do all questions have to be made in words? I would build on that by saying, do all responses need to be given in words? Can we use visual approaches to pose our questions or to prompt participants to respond, and then be open to responses in visual forms? So obviously, I think that the answer to his question about whether all questions need to be posed in words, is that there are many other options. And especially with the technologies we now have available and that are increasingly available on all kinds of mobile devices as well as computers. So on the green side of this table, we have some kinds of features that we can use. We're able to transmit images. Researchers can send images to participants. Participants can send images to us. We can view those images either alone as part of our research and data analysis, or together with the participants as a part of our interaction. We can navigate visual environments, and that's kind of what we're doing right now. I'm in this visual environment with these slides, and you are viewing those with me. And if we were here together, we could be talking about it. So we can look at not only slides and images such as we have in this particular session, but we could also use a shared whiteboard or shared applications, shared desktop to look at different kinds of software. If we're studying technology and how people use technology, we could even be viewing our organization's websites with some of our clients to say, show me how you use this website. Are you able to find the information you need? Can you use this application form to apply for the services that you want to use? So we can go into those environments and look at them and move around in them and talk about them. Or we can generate images using drawing, whiteboard, or other kinds of kind of photographic screenshots, images, all different kinds of ways that we can create images within the research exchange. So with those tools, we can use visual communication to convey complex or abstract ideas or relationships or examples that show something particular about the phenomenon, so that represent the phenomenon. As the old saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Sometimes we can just communicate something very concisely using visual means and get our message across. Then once we've gotten that message across, we could use it as a kind of springboard for further conversation. So we can use visual stimuli to encourage participants to compare and contrast their own experiences with what's been shown, to recall and think about and imagine and brainstorm about what they've seen. And certainly elicitation techniques have been widely used by qualitative researchers, and we can now do them online to not only include participants in a wider geographic area, but also to capture the interaction and save it and archive it. Then we can take a further step into the visual collaboration, and here once again we're generating visual images as well. So meshing these two models, we've got we can collect and analyze images or media. We can use those images or media either that we have created or that have found, or that participants have created as elicitation to stimulate conversation in interviews or participant observations, or we can collaborate with participants to generate rich data. So, as you think about the possibility of using some of these techniques, one of the decisions that you'll need to make is about the technology or technologies you will decide to use. And as you'll see here and in my book, I tend to avoid using the name brands and the company names, partly because the kinds of tools people might use in one part of the world might be different than another part of the world. And also the features themselves change within a given platform. So I encourage researchers to think about the features they need, what information and communication technology features are useful for your research. What kind of technology platforms would serve as a good research setting for your research, and then select the tool. So as I've kind of parsed them out here, we have text-based communication that involves, primarily typed words, but can also use emoticons or links to images, as well as exchanging images themselves. We can, I've talked quite a lot about, images and media, and I'd just like to add in the idea of using maps. Here we might think about whether locative information would be useful. Do we want to know, for example, where in the community people feel uncomfortable or at risk of different kinds of conflict or problematic behaviors? Where in the community do they have a hard time navigating with a wheelchair or with a baby carriage? So, does the place matter to, what you're trying to understand about the phenomenon? If so, using geographic maps, using GPS to, kind of be able to key in the exact location we're talking about, can be, another way to use technology. We can also certainly use other kinds of visual maps, mind maps, and diagrams of that kind. We can use social networking sites for a variety of purposes in online research. I do caution against creating interviews within social networking sites, mainly because it is difficult to assure participants that you can protect the data. You don't own the data. The social networking site owns the data. They own the interactions that take place on their site. So that's kind of just a cautionary point. There are certainly lots of ethical dilemmas around every one of these approaches, but that one's I'd like to particularly point out. However, there's certainly ways that we can replicate the kinds of interactions people have on social networking sites and use those in other settings that we have more control over. We can use video conferencing if it is important to us to be able to see the participant and to have the participant see us, to develop rapport and trust, to see nonverbal signals, etc. Or we might use a multi-channel web conference like the space we're in right now that allows us to communicate in a number of different ways with audio, video, text. We can share desktops, as I've mentioned before, and so there's lot of options for that. We can use virtual environments, virtual reality, virtual worlds, or games. These can be useful if we want to create simulations. And they're also, of course, important if we're studying the ways that people interact with games. Now, one of the questions that came up in this webinar related to access and digital literacy skills. So, the couple of tips I would suggest about that, when selecting the technology, we would certainly want to think about the target population for the study and what their typical technology use might be, what their limitations are, what kinds of tools they're accustomed to using in the kinds of interactions they typically might have. So, that might influence our choice. If we want to use video conferencing, do participants have mobile devices or computers that include webcams, for example? One way we can work around that, if we find that our participants lack access to these tools, might be to partner with another agency, such as community centers, senior citizen centers, schools, clinics if we're studying healthcare issues, and by partnering with another agency, we can create that has this kind of the technology on the site. Then the participant just needs to go to that place and perhaps just sit down in front of the computer and have the video conferencing set up and just participate in the interaction without a lot of effort on their part to manipulate the technology. I've read a number of studies that have used this kind of approach, and certainly if part of your dilemma is that you need to access participants who are in another geographic area, looking for local partners, might be a solution. Another option might be to partner with a university class, a research methods class, or something of that nature, and have some kind of research assistants who you could train to sit down with the elderly or disabled or participant who lacks technology skills, and help them work through what they need to use in order to participate in the study. So there are some avenues you can take to include diverse participants in an online study. I just have a few screenshots to show you some examples. With visual communication, we can share views of all kinds of things, not only looking at online artifacts or software and that sort of technology. We might be looking at other kinds of evidence that the participant wants to share with us. Using elicitation techniques, we might begin with some kind of diagrams or graphics. With this example, we might say, tell me which of these diagrams best represents communication in your organization. Does the communication channel go through the leader, or does the communication go directly between the members? That would be where are the obstacles? So is there a barrier here? Or if we're looking at the choices, this one, we might say, well, what happens when one member doesn't fulfill his or her role? So we can use the diagram as a way to focus participants on the topic at hand, perhaps give them some options that might stimulate the conversation. again, using a navigation in a virtual world, creating an interview environment specifically for the study, or finding an environment that is conducive to the study. In this second one, from the American Cancer Society, this is a space where they hold support group meetings with cancer patients. So, if this was a topic you were studying, this might be a place where you could obtain access to observe or participate in a study and get, a different sense from participants than you might in a more realistic kind of visual interaction. Again, using, diagrams as the basis of a collaborative approach, using the drawing tools to, kind of illustrate and talk about what's going on. If you have a tech-savvy participant, you can, the participant can use the drawing tools and write on the screen while explaining, what's going on in the situation. If the person isn't comfortable with that, then the participant can speak while you are kind of transcribing and making notes. So, there are a lot of ways you can use these interactive tools to generate data from within the study. Of course, it is all captured, and then, you have the verbal record of the conversation as well as the visual representation that you can analyze in your data. This is an example from a photo voice study. Photo voice is a participatory action research method that qualitative researchers have used extensively in face-to-face types of research, typically giving participants disposable cameras, asking them to take pictures around a particular topic, and then usually to also do some kind of diary narrative to go along with the photograph. And this kind of study, increasingly is now being conducted online or using technology such as the camera on a mobile phone. So this can also be combined with the locative data, so that, say, for example, with this study that is about where people find food in their communities, that might be that they would add in kind of the GPS coordinates for the location where the photographs were taken. So as you think about these kinds of approaches, another point to consider is the degree of consistency from one participant to the next that you want versus the amount of flexibility that you want. So in this continuum represents a kind of from structured at one end to unstructured at the other end. In the more structured approaches, we're going to present the same kinds of visual stimulus to all of the participants. And so here, as a researcher, I might create a series of visual representations. Perhaps I have 6 photographs using the example, the kind of study described in that photo voice study. Maybe as a researcher, I create 6 photographs of different places where people might get food in their community. So I've got a grocery store and a farmer's market and a kind of food stall, food truck, restaurant, cafe, different kinds of locations. And I'm going to use those same photographs with all of my participants. Or I have on the same kind of virtual environment for all of the participants, or the same kind of media piece that shows the teacher in the classroom or whatever the topic may be. Now, by creating those representations myself, I can secure any kind of copyright or permissions needed to use those visual images not only within my interactions with participants, but also in any kind of published reports. So, there's some advantages there. And, I'm kind of, in a way, creating some initial categories in my data that would align with, the particular examples I've given for the participants to response. Whereas, at the other end of the spectrum, kind of like the photo voice study, where I might be asking the participants to generate the visuals, take pictures of your own community, draw your something about your experience. So now I will have a much wider range of visuals in my data. I might have some graphics and some photographs and some drawings, maybe even some little video clips and, all kinds of material that, I have a broader inductive process to take to analyze all of this material. But at the same time, I've also got, more diversity and, really the sense, from the perspective of the participants. Now, if I'm concerned about whether I can use these visuals in reports or share them with others, then, that's something that I might want to include in my informed consent. So, I might want to, have something built in terms of permission to use those materials. I may have to use Photoshop or something like that to blur out the images of other people who are not consenting participants to the study. So there's no right or wrong here. It's just a matter, again, of thinking strategically about what will fit the purpose of the study, what makes the most sense given the participants for the study, the amount of time you have to conduct the study, and other factors of that kind. And, the clearer you can be, at the design stage about those decisions, the better things will turn out, because it'll be easier to explain to anyone who might be approving the study, as well as to the participants. So again, you can find the exercise in the materials you can download and use as you wish. So we'll switch gears slightly to other kinds of participatory methods that may or may not use visual approaches. So online, we have lots of ways to interact, to experience things, and then to, observe the ways that people respond. So we can go into an environment or in an existing environment. It could be a classroom or a meeting, that sort of thing, and conduct some kind of field experiment. Or we could create a world for the purpose of the experiment, and create some kind of a place where we can enact a simulation with participants. Again, this could be a good way to study problems where we want to see how someone might react to a crisis, to a sudden medical crisis in their environment, to a natural disaster, to a terrorist or criminal act. So we can create some kind of a simulation that would allow us to observe and discuss the ways the participants might handle that type of circumstance. We can, again, use games that allow people to manipulate and interact and immerse themselves within an environment. Or we could use vignette, scenario, or problem-based role plays that allow us to take different parts and look at a problem from a variety of perspectives. So I've got a couple of examples to share, and I will include these references in the materials you can download if you'd like to read these articles. In this first one, this is an example where the researchers wanted to use the kinds of social networking communication styles that young people are familiar with, but to have more control and kind of assurance of privacy than they would be able to have in a commercial site like Facebook. So they created their own site, which they described as a blog. I mean, I would probably describe as more of a forum, a place where people can post responses back and forth to each other. And these young people who went through a consent process with the parents, etc., so no worries about that. And as Muslim youth living in Ireland, I think would certainly be considered a sensitive kind of experience. Might not be experiences they would want to share more generally in a place like Facebook. So having a private space to interact with a small group seemed to be ideal for this particular study. The researchers who I interviewed, Orla McCary, about this study, and really I think a fabulous example here. And rather than be highly engaged in the actual discussion, the researchers wanted to kind of step back and allow the young people to kind of have their own more natural conversation, and to have the topics of the conversation emerge from the participating youth, and simply to step in to post prompts from time to time to kind of get the conversation going, or to keep things moving. In this second example, this is a simulation. Would fall into that description of creating a micro world, using a virtual world. So rather than simply interviewing participants about their experiences with collaborative learning, they could create an environment that had kind of tasks or problems built into it, and then observe the ways the participants handled the situation. So they followed that observational process with focus groups, where they could then find out more about what the participants thought about the experience. You could construct vignettes and use them for online role plays. You can see that this example, which I thought was well stated, it's from certainly a very early adopter researcher to have used this kind of approach in the 1990s, but trying to create a level of immersion in a situation and engage the participants in this interaction, that goes beyond what you could simply do by sharing a written scenario. So the vignette could be that an initial process might include watching a video that depicted something about the situation, and then have the researcher and participant or participants take various roles and then reflect on the situation and how they handled it. Again, just a quote about creating such scenarios. important to make them focused on the particular aspect of the phenomenon or type of reaction or type of problem solving you want to study, because it could certainly otherwise, just be too general to really even get anything out of it, but also to be something that people find realistic. So constructing the scenarios might include an initial stage to get some feedback from people who represent the demographic for your study, to kind of find out whether or not they can relate to the scenario you've created. Again, I've offered you some exercises. You can try these out. So in closing, I've tried to explain a little bit about what some of these kinds of approaches might be like and why you might use them, to hopefully engage participants in a meaningful way that would move beyond the kind of question and answer style that we often have in a qualitative data collection approach, using interviews or questionnaires or those kinds of methods.